Welcome to another episode of Sibling Showdown. This is kind of a emergency episode to talk about one specific topic, and that is Anthony Richardson and where he is going in best ball drafts. So I am Meg. You can follow me at Megs08DFS on Twitter, and I'm of course joined by my sibling, my brother Steve. You can follow him at SteveOSpeak on Twitter. Steve, really quick, how are you doing today? And then are you really ready to kind of look at both sides of the Anthony Richardson debate?
Yeah, no, I'm doing well. And I think it's an interesting debate. I think some of this is obviously, we love football and we need something to talk about this far out from the season. But,
Yeah.
I think there are some strategies here. And I think, I think it's important to look at the full picture.
Yeah, I think why we wanted to do kind of like we got to do a show about this really quick. And we just want to make this like a 10 to 12 minute, like quick kind of debate piece, seeing both sides of it. But we got to do something because we're seeing it just flooded on Twitter because of the Anthony Richardson steam. And mainly, I'm going to put it up on the screen really quick. But mainly, it's because if you read the tweet from Underdog, Anthony Richardson is now being drafted as a top 10 quarterback in Best Ball Mania 4. Now, obviously, right after the draft, he was, going, pretty high in itself once people knew that he was a first round pick, 4th overall to the Colts. But like it has gotten steamed up and his ADP is now 86 and seems to be still rising. So, and we'll get over to looking at the rankings and showing who he's being drafted with. But if you are a best ball junkie like we are, and you go on Twitter, you're going to see constant things about, constant tweets and, content about Anthony Richardson. And people are on both sides of the aisle, and people that I respect too don't necessarily agree with me, but, people are on both sides of this. So I honestly, in my perspective, it seems like more just are very kind of infatuated with the upside, which is part of best ball, and are taking him this high. Truth be told, before we get into it, I don't, that's not really where we stand, but we want to look at both sides of the argument objectively and then, see where we land and talk this through that way. So Steve, let's first hit the pros and cons. Obviously, you've done the NFL draft, like scouting side for us for years, since that's a big component of fanspeak.com. And, as like the college scouting eye, going into the NFL as a rookie prospect. Give me first the pros on Anthony Richardson.
Sure. I mean, the pros are very obvious. One, you just look at him. I mean, his size is spectacular. His arm strength is off the charts. And then, he can run as fast as anyone. This is the thing. He runs like, RG3, but in almost Cam Newton or Josh Allen's body. He, those guys were like 4.6, 4.7, 40 times. He was like 4.4. Right. So range. So yeah, it's that kind of ability. His arm, easily comp to these guys like Cam or Josh Allen, big, strong arm guys. And you saw that some in college. I mean, he could hit some just gorgeous deep balls. Absolutely no doubt about that. Though, to be fair, other guys in this draft class, like CJ Stroud, has a big arm. Will Levis has a big arm. And, we see those types of guys, of course, in every class. The other thing that does make that I would say is a pro is you do see signs of reading defenses. Not all the time. This is not, what we saw from Joe Burrow, his national championship season where he was just torching SEC defenses. Right. But you saw signs where he would at times know where to make the right throw. He would see what the safeties were doing. He would diagnose it. Wasn't always accurate when he tried to enact his plan, but he saw signs of that kind of upside and potential growth there. But that is kind of where the pros stop. Okay,
so now give me the cons. What are the cons to Anthony Richardson?
So the cons are we just have a very, very small sample size. He had 12 starts this past year, played some the year before, mainly as a secondary weapon, a lot of running. And his accuracy is just really, really poor. I mean, we've not really seen a first round pick. Josh Allen's the only other one who's kind of a sub 60% completion rate. and and Allen played more years, so you had a bigger picture window of him, and you saw some signs of growth. It was just easier, when Allen starts 30 games, you can find more good than bad. With Richardson, you really have to dig for the goal, the good.
Right.
And that can be a problem because sample size is very small. It was the SEC, but even against weaker SEC opponents or non-conference, he still had the same struggle. So it wasn't just like he's getting beat up by LSU and Georgia and Alabama. I think the other con is takes a lot of sacks, very inaccurate, especially in the short and intermediate area.
Yeah.
And as much as we hype big arms, deep throwing, passing, so much of the NFL right now is that short and intermediate area.
Right.
That's where offenses thrive. You need to have that area open if you're going to set up the deep ball, because otherwise, as we saw last year, all this too high coverage, and people say, oh, they won't be able to do that against Richardson. Guess what? Teams did that against Josh Allen. Teams did that against Jalen Hurts. Did it always work? No, because those are better quarterbacks. They're more experienced quarterbacks.
Right.
So, Richardson's going to have to earn it. Richardson's definitely going to have to earn it and show that he can succeed throwing the football. Otherwise, teams are just going to stack the box against him.
Right. Okay. So, really the summary is amazing upside, amazing, again, tested off the charts at the combine. Maybe does have a little anticipation that he throws with, but very inaccurate or pretty inaccurate coming into the NFL. Very much a lack of a sample size. And, while the deep ball is pretty, the short and intermediate, which is very important in the NFL passing game, is not there right now coming into the NFL. So, that to me speaks to a pretty raw prospect. Yes, with immense, athletic upside, but, a pretty raw prospect. Now let's talk about kind of the percent outcomes. You always talk about range of outcomes when you're talking about betting DFS, best ball. Best ball, we're looking for those spike weeks. Obviously, let's talk the worst case scenario. The 0 to 20% outcome is he just, doesn't play. They don't feel he doesn't feel he's ready, for whatever, or gets injured. Let's be honest. So that not playing is they're the best ability is availability. And if he isn't playing, that is the worst case scenario. But let's talk about what would be that 25% range of outcomes, pretty weak first year for him. What would that look like?
Yeah, so I think that would still include him likely not starting every game, likely sitting to start the year, and we see
which
that
a lot of rookies don't. Exactly.
Yeah, we see that a lot. Even highly drafted rookies. Baker Mayfield didn't start his first two games. Justin Fields did not start the first two games.
Right.
Even Josh Allen was not expected to start. He didn't actually start week one, but I believe they had Nate Peterman. Peterman threw 3 interceptions, and they just threw Josh Allen in there, and Allen kept going. But Allen had a lot of struggles, so that's important to keep in mind. But while people will say, oh, it's Gardner Minshew, that's his only competition, Gardner Minshew has been the Shane Steichen offense the last 2 years in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. He knows this offense. We've seen him have some spike weeks of himself and succeed. So, I don't think Gardner Minshew's going to be awful. So if they do go that route, Minshew might play well enough to play 2, 4, 6 games. Some of it could be dependent on where their bye week is. You see a lot of teams will wait till after a bye week.
Like Lamar's rookie year. Yeah.
Lamar's rookie year, Jared Goff's rookie year. Mm-hmm. There are a couple other guys who like Tua and Tua and there was another one that was week 6 where they inserted them in, but it was right after the bye. So so even missing those games, and yes, we talked about best ball playoffs. Playoffs are more important, but those, where he's being drafted now, those first 4, 5, 6 weeks, if he's not starting, you might not make the playoffs. If your quarterback that you're drafting in top 100 picks isn't playing, it could be a lot harder for you to even make the playoffs unless you've really built your team. And that, I know that's something we'll talk about later, but that's a factor. And then even beyond missing those types of games, just not performing at a high level, getting a lot of 12 to 18 point fantasy games really isn't going to be usable or definitely not what you're expecting from that kind of draft investment.
Right. Okay. Now let's talk best case scenario. I mean, we could go on all day. We're already at 10 minutes and we could go on all day, but we really want to quickly make the kind of both sides of the debate argument. Let's talk best case scenario for the people who are drafting him now. What is the absolute like 95th or 90th percent outcome here?
Well, let me give the like 75 to 90% outcome before we get to the ultimate. And that is,
Sure.
I think the best example would be like a Daniel Jones or Marcus Mariota. Jones actually didn't start right away. Mariota did. Both missed some time due to injury, but can't really account for that. But both of those guys had spike weeks. They had 30-point games. When they didn't have spike weeks, though, they were not that great. So you're getting, Daniel Jones cases like 4 or 5 games, Mariota about 4 games. And, that's great. But you definitely need a good, solid quarterback with them to get those 20-point games in between when they're not spiking.
Right.
The ultimate outcome would probably be like a Justin Herbert. He got hurt, but Deshaun Watson, and then going way, way back, a Cam Newton or Robert Griffin III. Those are the guys who every time they were in there.
And you're speaking their rookie season, obviously.
Their rookie season.
Right, because that's the context of what we're trying to look at this. This is not a second or third year guy. Yeah.
Exactly. Like looking at what Justin Fields did last year or Jalen Hurts did in these last couple of years, it's just not the same thing. And but the guys that I mentioned, Cam, RG3, Herbert, they were top 10, even at the top. I mean, Deshaun Watson, when he got injured, was the highest scoring fantasy quarterback at that time. He gets injured, so he only plays 7 games. Tough to know if he would have maintained that. But those are the types of guys who not only got the spike weeks, but they consistently got, 18, 20, 24-point games that were you consistently won in best ball. So they were definitely advancing you into the playoffs. Definitely a good chance most weeks to put up a score to advance you in each round and have those like absolute omega spike weeks that you wanted.
Right.
Problem is that is basically the sample that we're talking about over the last 12 years.
Right. That's an outlier. And Steve's going to have an article on fanspeak.com this week, looking at that whole 12-year picture and the rookie quarterbacks, and basically to show there are just these few outliers of this like very top percentile outcome. So, again, I want to point before we get to like what you would need as a AR drafter right now at this draft capital. I want to point out that a lot of people, on Twitter or who seem to be very bullish on drafting AR do constantly point to the rushing floor or, like Fields, like Lamar, like Hurts. Well, again, you can't compare Anthony Richardson, a rookie, and all the things we've just talked about for the last 12 minutes to, a second year Lamar when he won the MVP, a second year Fields when he had, 3 or a couple spike weeks last year that were very impactful. And again, you were getting Fields much later, by the way. He was like drafted as like QB 16 or 17. A second or third year Hurts. Like that's not comparing apples to apples. Yeah. And so again, you are really looking for those outlier outcomes that you're talking about of the RG3, Cam Newton, Justin Herbert, that has only happened a handful of times in the last 12 years. So with that said, I think that's just smacking some perspective on this. With that being said, if you drafted him as he's the QB 10, ADP is the QB 10 right now. What outcome do you need? I mean, it's somewhere probably in between that Daniel Jones too, like the Griffin Newton range, right?
Yeah. Even Daniel Jones, due in part because he missed some games and didn't start the year, he ended up in the top 10 in weeks per average, but it was mainly because he was buoyed by these massive spike weeks.
Sure.
His other games, like I said, were not really ones you wanted. So
right.
Over a longer sample, he probably would have fallen slightly unless he had one more of those major spike weeks. So yeah, I mean, if he's a Daniel Jones in this range, I think it's still doable if you get a Goff, a Cousin, somebody who's going to just consistently churn 18, 20-point games to make up for, even Justin Fields last year, before he went on that run in the mid-tier where he had those 40-point games, couple high 20-point games, he had games under 10 points.
Right.
That's just not playable. You're getting buried at that point. And you add that 6-point game to that 44-point game, and guess what? That's only a 25-point average. I mean, obviously you need guys who can counter that. Some guys were a bit more consistent. Kyler was a bit more consistent. Herbert was much more consistent. Watson for his time, those 7 games was extremely consistent.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, if you're getting in that case, like Watson, a top 5 fantasy outcome, yeah, that'd be great. But right now, if he's just getting you like Herbert, you're getting a little value. Herbert, I think, finished QB7 his year. But you're not getting a ton is I think the point.
So you need that high outcome of, again, these outlier situations that we've talked about, combined with a lot of these guys that you've mentioned that had those outlier situations, started a lot more games in college, had a lot more experience, were a lot less raw. So that's just kind of another, caveat to all this. Or if you did get that Daniel Jones like outcome where he gave you like 3 or 4 spike weeks, you are going to have to nail the right quarterbacks with it that get it perfectly, and so that's kind of, narrowing, kind of, just making it more difficult, I think, on yourself as to who your quarterback stable will be and who's being putting up your quarterback score. So I think those are the things that's important to consider. Any other thoughts on that before we look at who he's being drafted before? And I think that's where I land the most and why I have the stance I have.
Yeah. So the one thing I will say, and a lot of people bring this up, is the Shane Steichen factor. Steichen was in the Chargers offense when Herbert was a rookie. Obviously, has been with Hurts the last 2 years, and I think Steichen, it's a great coach to have. Yeah. But those guys were much more experienced. I mean, Herbert was at Oregon for 5 years. Obviously, we know what Hurts did, first at Alabama, then going to Oklahoma, and of course had his rookie year. He didn't come in until like the last four weeks of his rookie year, so he had plenty of time to grow and develop. And I just think we're talking a little bit, apples and oranges. Like it's not like totally out of bounds, but they're by no means the same.
Right. All right. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm pulling over the underdog rankings. I have QBs pulled up, and I think this is what's important, right? I scrolled down, and right above him, you have Lawrence at 59 ADP, Watson at ADP of 79. Right behind that is Anthony Richardson at 85. He is, again, QB 10 right now. Right behind that, Dak Prescott at 87, Tua Tagovailoa 91, Daniel Jones 98, Kirk Cousins 99, and Aaron Rodgers 104. You could even go down further to Geno and Jared Goff. So, I mean, when you look at those quarterbacks that he is drafted above, Dak, Tua, Daniel Jones, Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, Geno Smith, Jared Goff, Russell Wilson, if you think he's going to bounce back, I think that's several quarterbacks that not only could outscore him on like the QB, for the year, the average, but quite honestly, could have just as many spike weeks. If you say, oh, well, AR is going to have more spike weeks than these guys, okay, not necessarily though, if it's in more in that like 50 to 75% range of outcome. Maybe it's the same. And then these guys are giving you much, much, much better floors. So I think it's, for me, when it comes down to, you listen to the pros, you listen to the cons, you think of all the range of outcomes. Honestly, the Shane Steichen thing is probably the one that scares me the most. Like, wait, could he have that 95% outcome? But when you think about just like him coming in as a rookie, just playing 16 games in college since he was in high school, like to expect him to crank out like what Herbert and Newton and Griffin and all these guys did, in his first season, I just think is a bit unrealistic. And therefore, for me, and I sound like Shark Tank. For me, I'm out. I just don't think he's worth drafting above these guys. And I didn't have interest drafting right after the draft when he was a little below these guys, but he's gotten steamed up quickly. Yeah. And quite honestly, I could see the steam going even higher. I'll be interested to see where he truly lands, and it'll all be as camp reports evolve in the summer. And then of course, preseason, it'll be interesting to see where he lands, but kind of, he'd have to drop a lot further down below these guys for me to have an interest. So, to round out this show, just speak to, is that where you land, as you would rather draft these, like, 5 or 6 guys behind them, ahead of them? And, where is your stance to round out the
Yeah,
show?
I mean, it's very similar. One, it's locked in. We know those guys are starting week one.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah.
And one thing I forgot to mention earlier, like a lot of the Colts brass has made comments like, we believe we need to get him out there. We believe,
Right.
you need reps. And I think that's true. I do think he'll play a lot. If it is sitting in a couple games, he'll probably be like Justin Fields, 1 or 2, or just a couple. But the Colts brass in those comments have also said, we will take the growing pains, meaning they're
Yeah.
not expecting him to come out and
Right.
be Justin Herbert or be, second and third year Jalen Hurts. So I
Right.
think that is important to note.
Right.
Can he exceed that? Absolutely. But that's just where we have to, have that kind of mentality. My point is, we should listen to the full quote, not just the 5 words
Yeah.
that we might like.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you look at Dak historically these last couple of years, and I know there's an offensive coordinator change, but we're still talking about Dak, a very efficient offense. He's got a ton of weapons, great offensive line. They're going to put up points, and he's in a division that could definitely have some shootouts with the Eagles, the Giants, etc. Same. We know what healthy Tua is. We absolutely do. If he stays fully healthy, and is that a big if? Sure, but we
And his
know Tua
weapons. Yeah.
has the ceiling of anyone. And you just keep going down that list. I mean, Daniel Jones, second year in that offense, could get better. They added a few pieces, nothing great, but definitely could get better. Cousins, they add a big piece. He had a great year, and his touchdown percentage, he is actually probably due positive touchdown regression there. Aaron Rodgers, new look, great setting, some great offensive weapons. And, same with Geno and Goff. I mean, these are some high power potential offenses. Do I think Richardson will get beat by all of these guys? No, probably not. I wouldn't be surprised if he beats a couple of them. But
Right.
You're also getting those guys around 2-3 rounds later.
Yeah.
So there's also the opportunity costs involved. So, I would just keep that in mind. And honestly, the way that I would approach it, I will, take a couple shares of Richardson, but then I'm pairing him with one of those quarterbacks behind, which means I feel the need that I'm going to have to double dip in this range and go get a Goff, go get a Geno, just because I feel like I need that guy who can get a lot of 20-point plus games.
Right. No, I think that says it perfectly. And yeah, I mean, if his ADP were to drop a lot, and people were to, let the ADP settle a little bit, maybe I'd have interest in some more shares. But I think, like you, at this price, I'm out, and yeah, maybe a couple head shares, but you better believe that, yeah, I'm getting guys like that can stabilize the quarterback position for sure.
Yeah.
So hopefully this has helped you guys. Again, it's trying to look at both sides of it, even though, we are not bullish on Anthony Richardson at this price. We wanted to look at both sides and look at the whole picture. Because there's a lot out there right now. So hopefully you find this helpful to make your decisions on, how much Anthony Richardson you want in your portfolio, and just keep all that framework in mind as the ADP rises and falls throughout the summer, as to, again, how much you want in your portfolio. Before you get out of here, be sure to like this episode, subscribe to the FanSpeak Network. We're going to be churning out best ball content every week this summer, at multiple times a week, multiple shows a week, multiple live drafts, a live draft every single week, if not more. So we are excited for all that. So thank you so much for joining us. Let us know in the comments what you think about Anthony Richardson, and we will see you next time.